All right, so resuming here with Rudolf Steiner's Egyptian Myths and Mysteries. We're on lecture 11, which is the second to last lecture in this lecture cycle. And in this lecture, Steiner begins by sort of recapping what went on in the previous lecture, where we saw that as the post-Atlantean civilizations have evolved from India to Persia to Egypt and to the Greco-Latin period, there has been an increase in objective consciousness and a corresponding decrease in, on the one hand, a loss of clairvoyant abilities, and then on the other, when the dead go to the other side, they have darker experiences in Devashan. The other world, which he calls Devashan, has become darker and darker over time. And so in this lecture, he wants to ask the question, last time he asked what the significance of the Christ event was for initiates. This time he wants to ask, what is the significance of the Christ event for the dead? From the point of view of the dead, what does it do for them? What good does it do for them? So the first question he wants to know is the purpose of initiation rites. It's a little different with what happened in the past versus what happened with the Christ event. The initiation rituals, he says, the primary purpose of them is to awaken within the astral body certain new organs of perception. And elsewhere he calls these imagination, inspiration, and intuition. And if you want to look those up, they're in my video series on Outline of Esoteric Science, where he goes into very specific details about specific exercises that can be done to awaken these higher faculties. But this is what from the point of view of the Egyptian initiate, and this is the point of view that he's interested in. These are the things that would have been revealed to the Egyptian initiate, what that initiate would have seen in these processes. So awakening these higher faculties is the goal and purpose of these initiation rituals. And he says that just as organs of physical perception, we have eyes and ears, we can't see in the dark because we don't have clairvoyant perception, he says. But we have eyes and ears and that have been awakened in the physical body over time. And now he wants to help us awaken organs within the astral body. And he says that one of the processes and problems is that as the astral body picks up impressions from the day, sense impressions, and it withdraws from the physical and etheric bodies together with the ego and goes to the other side, those impressions on the astral body do not remain in a permanent state. They're not permanent acquisitions because they're not in the etheric body. In order for them to become permanent, the astral body would have to imprint the etheric body. So he says there were special initiation practices done by the Egyptians in which the Egyptian initiate, or neophyte, I guess, would be put in a simulated death state where the etheric body would have to be lifted up out of the physical body. And if the etheric body withdraws from the physical body, you have a dead body. But he says they did this. They for 3.5 days, they put the neophyte into a simulated death, whereby the etheric body withdrew so that the astral body could then stamp it like a stamp seal, let's say, with the impressions that it had received from its sojourn in the realm of the gods during the night. And the things that would have been seen by the Egyptian initiate in this process would have been things like he would have seen the truths regarding the withdrawal of the moon from the earth during the Lemurian phase. When Osiris and Isis withdrew along with the moon, he would see that relationship, all the interrelationships between Osiris, Isis, and Horus. He says he would also have seen the Sphinx. The Sphinx would have been this half human, half animal being that the Egyptian initiate, or neophyte, I guess, would have recognized as a form that was cast off during the evolution, the spiritual evolution of humanity during the Lemurian phase, when we saw that after the sun withdrew from the earth, the human being swam about in this densified, the air densified into water, and the human being swam about as a half fish, half human being with the etheric body extending out like a light-filled sort of flower turned toward the sun. And then with the withdrawal of the moon, then islands would have appeared as matter densified and solidified. Islands would have appeared, and half animal, half human beings would have crawled up on the land. And the Egyptian neophyte would have seen these individualities and would have seen that the Sphinx was basically a real being. And that the gods during that time, when they wanted to incarnate as avatars amongst men, they had to obey the laws of the physical plane as it was at that time. So they had to incarnate as half human, half animal beings, like the Egyptian gods. They had to incarnate with beings that had animal heads, for instance, in order to commune with these early types of human beings. And so he wants to make the point that, and he turns Darwin's model upside down by saying, we're not descended from the animals. The animals are descendants of us. We were there first. As we have seen in the Saturn phase, human beings appeared first. Then in the Sun phase, human beings appeared alongside the germs of the animal forms that just sparkled into being. And then he says that during this Lemurian phase, when the half human, half animal beings were crawling up onto these islands, they were shedding animal forms, and they were going through animal forms to experience what they were like. And he says today's animals are simply animals that were once human beings at stages of spiritual development that they got stuck in, and animals are a degeneration of these beings. They are beings that stopped their evolution, and he says it's a general law of the spiritual world. When you take on a form and stay stuck in it, that degeneration is what takes place from that point on, and animals are just the exteriorizations of passions and instincts and lower, baser elements in the human being that have been shed by the human being through the spiritual process, so that animals are actually cast off human forms that are in a degenerate state. So they are, they have been cast aside just tossed aside by the human being. And he says that during the period before man had an ego, and the ego is the thing that came into being during the earth phase of evolution, the whole purpose and point of it, these spiritual beings that were humans would have had physical bodies, astral bodies, and etheric bodies, but the ego was something that was implanted into the astral body by a sort of collaboration between sun spirits and moon spirits, both at this point having withdrawn from the earth. And there was a collaboration between them to construct the ego and implant it into man's astral body. But he said that there were certain beings, as we have seen as we have gone along, especially through Outline of Esoteric Science, that were in arrested stages of development also on the Saturn, Sun, and Moon phase, and they never made it up to become spiritually sophisticated enough to participate in this process of collaborating with the creation of man's ego. So what they did was they could only work on man's astral body. And so they exerted negative influences on man's astral body. And these negative influences ended up becoming passions and desires, animal instincts, lower base elements that infected the astral body with an excess of egotism. This is the negative side of the ego. This is not ego in Steiner's positive sense of a higher spiritual capacity to open up toward the spiritual worlds through initiation processes that awaken organs of perception, new ones in the astral body, higher spiritual organs, but the processes of selfishness, egotism, and also illness. Illness is something also that has come about as the tampering of these beings, and he doesn't say at this point who they are, just undeveloped, spiritually undeveloped beings that have tampered with the human astral body and have rendered it prey to all sorts of negative influences and illnesses and so forth. Bad errors in judgment also come from this process. So the astral body in the human being is not pure. It's become infected over time with the negative influences of these beings. And so what he wants to know is then the significance then of the Christ impulse and the Christ's descent is that he says the Christ being now was a being that descended to change all this and to create a singularity in history in which what before his incarnation happened in the initiation cults. And the process of initiation into the mysteries would allow a ray of light into Devachan so that when the individual got to the other side, it would light up Devachan for him or her. In this case, he says that when the blood leaked out of Christ onto the hill at Golgotha, the blood carries the ego with it. He has an occult theory about the occult significance of blood, whereby blood is actually the bearer of the ego. The way we saw that last time, the astral body physicalized itself in the liver and the gall. Here he says that the blood is the thing that carries the ego within it. And then when it went into the earth, it actually took up with it, or made possible the potential for taking up with it, a surplus of egohood. The negative egotistic influences that went into the astral body as the result of the beings who were less developed from the three previous phases of Saturn, Sun, and Moon actually now have the possibility of being taken up as the surplus of it, taken out of the human astral body, And for that, Christ brought in the possibility of compassion and love to substitute for that selfishness and that egotism. So he opened up a new sort of pathway for the human being. It's a little bit like when he says that the reason that the moon left the earth was because there was a surplus of densifying processes that were hardening and stiffening the physical body, so that when the astral body returned to it after its nighttime sojourn amongst the gods in the spiritual world, the bodies were too stiff to be workable for evolutionary processes. So the moon had to withdraw to take the surplus of these densifying forces along with it. And here he says that the Christ event took the surplus of egotism out of the astral body, leaving room for the possibility for it to be replaced by love and compassion. And then he says that for the time of Christ's descent into the realm of the dead, which happens after the crucifixion on Friday, and then Saturday, of course, is what's called the harrowing of hell, where traditionally Christ descends into the underworld specifically to find the patriarchs and pull them out so that they don't have to suffer in hell with everyone else. But in this case, Steiner says what actually happened was that Christ went down into the realm of the dead, and there he informed the dead the good news that a new event had happened on the physical plane, whereas previously in spiritual evolution, what had happened is that everything that is physical has been the result of events that have taken place in the spiritual world. So that the spiritual world causes things to happen on the physical plane. Events, the physical world has densified, according to Steiner, everything physical has densified out of the spiritual. Everything physical is just dense spiritual matter, low vibrational matter, as we would say in New Age circles. Everything physical is low vibrational, dense, low, slow, long wave frequencies. And he informed the dead that something else happened over there on the physical plane now for the first time, that only happened in the mystery cults, in the initiation centers, and has now become for the first time an actual historical event on the physical plane that now affects the realm of the dead, that now affects Devachan and has the potentiality for changing it and lighting it up with new spiritual possibilities. And so that's sort of where he ends this chapter. And one thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to mention here is that he mentions that when the Egyptian initiate is initiated into the mysteries, and the vision that he has on the other side where he sees Osiris and Horus and encounters the Sphinx, he also encounters the four different types of the tetramorph, the lion and the bull, the eagle and the man, which Steiner had said represented in an earlier phase of evolution during the Atlantean period, four different types of human personalities. Those in whom a physical lust for life predominates are the bull types. Those in whom the spiritual aspect of life predominates are the eagle types. And he doesn't say what the lion types are, but each one of these corresponds to a part of the astral forces, the subtle forces. The lion represents those in whom the etheric body is predominant, and those in whom the physical body is predominant are the types of the bull, and those in whom the astral body is predominant are the type of the eagle, and those in whom the ego is predominant are, and not the negative ego, this is the positive Steinerian spiritual monad, predominate are the man types. And I do want to point out that, as I pointed out before, that Steiner anticipated Jung's theory of the contrasexual typology, that a man's psyche is feminine, has the anima, a woman's psyche is masculine, has the animus. Steiner already said that those in whom the Osirian element predominates in the etheric body are female. Those in whom the Isis element predominates in the etheric body are male. So he had already anticipated by 10 years, because these lectures date from 1908. Jung didn't figure this out until after the break from Freud in 1913, 14, 15, 16, right in that period. Here Steiner already has it. He also has a typology that corresponds to Jung's typology that he also works out as a result of his encounter with Freud. The book Psychological Types, which was published in 1921, but which Jung had been working on for years, his theory of personality typology, in which he says that the psyche is based on an opposition between thinking and feeling on the one hand, and between sensation and intuition on the other. Sensation clearly corresponds to the bull, the types in whom the physical body are predominant, whereas intuition corresponds, of course, to the eagle, the types in whom the astral body is predominant for more spiritual matters, poets and artists, let's say. Those in whom thinking predominates are the ones in which the ego has predominated. The man, the type of the man, and the opposite, the feeling types, correspond, of course, to then, what do we have? Eagle, bull, man, lion. The lion types. The lion is associated with the heart in ancient astrological tradition, which is, of course, the metaphoric center for emotions and feelings. So he's already got a personality typology here as well that has been worked out, once again, 10 or 15 years before Jung has worked out his theory of personality typology. So as I'm reading back through Steiner here, I'm starting to see that he had already anticipated a lot of ideas that don't surface in Jung until many years later. And Jung just waved his hand at him and dismissed him. But clearly, there's a lot in Steiner that you can find in Jung elaborated in other ways. But I think that Steiner had these ideas first, a lot of these things. So we have one more chapter to go, chapter 12.